Hello everyone, time for another update on my Western project. So as you know from the previous video, I've sort of given up on the Western set of rules from Peter Pig, but I can't think of another title to give this project really. It is a Western theme, so I'm going to carry on calling it my Western project. These are another bag of 30 figures from Blue Moon, 15mm, dismounted Plains Indians. And I've already painted up a group of these figures so they don't look too dissimilar from a previous video, but you just have to take my word for it that they are a new batch. Let's just zoom in a little bit more so you can see them a little bit closer up. So I've still based them according to Peter Pig's rules. I can't see a problem with that really, because basing size isn't a massive issue with many rules nowadays, and as long as you got both sides based similarly, it doesn't seem to be a problem. So I've carried on so that my whole army is consistent in terms of basing sizes, and I've also tried to put them, they're 2 to a base, so there's 15 bases. I have still tried to put them so that each base has got the same weapon type, which is important for Peter Pig's rules. You have bows, you have long shooters and short shooters, so I've tried to conform to that, but it's quite possible whatever rules I settle for in the future won't require that. But quite pleased with the way they turned out. It's taken me a long time. I'm usually a slow painter anyway, and a bit distracted by other things at the moment as well, so my usual glacial speed of painting has slowed down even further, but this is one thing that I've got finished. Now on to the next. Next up, painted some casualty figures. Always a bit of a chore, but I do like having casualty markers like this rather than tokens. So I already had from the sort of little bighorn bag, these are Blue Moon again, by the way. Blue Moon do a sort of little bighorns vignette kind of bag, and there are some casualties in that. So I already did have a few casualties for the US cavalry, but I didn't have any for the Plains Indians. So these are 2 separate bags, casualties for Plains Indians in the front, and at the back the US cavalry. So again, I'll just zoom in a little bit on these so you can see them a bit more closely. So you get basically 10 figures, but one figure is a horse and another the rider, so you end up with 9 casualties. Each bag is the same. You have 1 horse and rider with the figure falling from the horse, 2 standing figures who've just been wounded and are about to fall, and then you have, in each bag you have 6 lying figures, presumably dead markers rather than wounded. But again, you know, quite pleased with the way they turned out. Right, now on to the next thing. Okay, now you may remember these aren't new. I've shown you these on a previous video. They're 4 buffalo from Freycore that I painted up, so they're okay, they're good. One problem is there's not enough of them, and they are all the same pose, so to buy more of them would be very repetitive and wouldn't quite look right. So I purchased and have painted up a bag of 6 buffalo, I believe it was, from Peter Pig. I was hoping that those figures would be varied. On the website they only show 1 buffalo, but unfortunately they are all identical as well. But then I began to think, what about my 3D printer? And I found a STL file free to download from Thingiverse of a buffalo. That is very large if you print it up as is, but I've reduced it down in size and I've varied the size a lot. So again, it's the same pose, but I've printed up lots of different sizes. So, and then I've put them all together on the basis with the Peter Pig figures, and here they all are. So now, hopefully that looks a little bit more like a kind of nice varied herd of buffalo. So the Peter Pig figure is this, where are we? This one at the front here. Bit of a funny looking animal. But as I say, throw it in for a bit of variety. And then the 3D version is this one here. So I printed it up all kinds of sizes, so some of them look like younger animals. The biggest one is this one here. This was actually 40% of the size of the original. So you can see, I think I did 40, 35, 30 and 25. I thought any younger than that and it would probably be a calf, and then it wouldn't necessarily have as much of a mane on it, so I stuck to that. But the Peter Pig figure, if I put the Freycore, there's the Freycore, and you can see the size of the Peter Pig in comparison. They are both meant to be 15mm. So if you then look at, well, there's a Peter Pig against the 3D version. You can see there is a big variety, there is a big spread in terms of size. I mean, the Freycore one is not too different in size from the largest of the 3D prints. So in terms of depiction of appropriate size, I think there's, you know, you'd have a good range of sizes of animals anyway. So quite happy with the way they all turned out. So that's all the painting that I've managed to get done, but I have got some other things to talk about and show you. So I've been rereading this famous book, The Custer Myth by W.A. Graham. Now, this book was first published in the early 1950s and then republished in the early 1980s, and I got this copy of it from the Naval and Military Press, who I'm not sure where the Custer Library comes from. I've got several books with this sleeve and this colour scheme and so on, with the title The Custer Library. So I've got a couple of other sort of seminal works on Custer in that series. But I bought this in the late 90s, so I've had it over 20 years now. Read it about 20 odd years ago, and I can remember at the time really being absorbed by it. So just to keep me in, you know, the theme of the West and the Plains Wars and so on, I thought I'd get it out and reread it, and I'm thoroughly enjoying it. W.A. Graham was a lawyer. He was born, I can't remember his date of birth, I think it was the 1880s, something like that. He was a lawyer, but he then joined the National Guard around, again, 1912, I think. And so he was an active serviceman as well, and he became fascinated with the story of Custer during his time in the service, and began writing on Custer and studying the subject from the 1920s, which is when I think he retired, is around the time he retired, or certainly left the army. And he'd spent like 30 years of research before. He had published other articles and books prior to this, but this is the kind of culmination of 30 years of his research. Now, there's two things about this book, really. One is that being a member of the armed forces, the American armed forces, he had a better access, you could say, to a lot of the protagonists. You know, a lot of Custer's contemporaries were still alive at the time, you know, of his research, and certainly the time of his service in the armed forces. And so he had better access to people like Lieutenant Godfrey, to Benteen was dead, but to Benteen's family, that kind of thing. So and he knew, and also doing his research, he was able to he had more sort of free access to documents and archives that were kept in military installations, cavalry forts and so on. So he was able to access the written orders and, you know, accounts and regimental records and all this kind of thing. So that is one thing. The other thing that really comes out in this is his sort of legalistic approach. That this book is what you would call a source book. It is primarily a kind of compilation of statements, witness statements from all kinds of, a whole spectrum of different witnesses, through to statements that were made at the Court of Inquiry into Reno's conduct at the battle, extracts from newspapers where journalists have interviewed a lot of the Native Americans who were present at the battle. So he's got lots of accounts from Sioux and from Cheyenne, as well as the Crows who acted as scouts for the US cavalry. So at first off, it just appears as though he is presenting you as you being a sort of almost like a juror, and he's presenting you with all the various witness accounts. The aim being is for you to form your own opinion on what happened at the Battle of the Little Bighorn, why it happened, how it happened, the time frame, all these kind of things. The reason this is so important in the 1920s when he began this research is that right from day one after the battle, there was a huge amount of interest in precisely how the battle had unfolded, how Custer and his 5 troops met their end, because there were, it was a complete mystery. No one survived from that section of the battle. Who was actually to blame for the disaster? Was it Reno's fault for not pressing his assault on the southern half of the Sioux, of the Plains Indians village, or was it Custer's fault for disobeying orders, possibly for being too rash, for attacking, for splitting his command? There are so many different nuances in this. So at first glance, you might think that is what Graham is doing. He's just presenting you with as much evidence as he can, and then allowing you to form your own opinion. But that's not sort of strictly the case, because and the secret lies in the actual title of this book, The Custer Myth. What Graham's purpose really was to do was to give you the evidence and none of the kind of hyperbole, because at the same time as he was researching this book and eventually publishing it, you have a completely different kind of lobby, as it were, which is spearheaded by Libby Custer, Custer's widow, who lived into ripe old age. She only died in the early, I think it was 1931. It was certainly the early 1930s. And from 1876 onwards, her life was almost dedicated to mythologizing Custer and presenting him as this epitome of American virtues and a sort of great American hero. And a lot of the sort of officers who served in the cavalry at the same time as Custer actually took her side and were quick to defend Custer's reputation and to write their own accounts of the battle, eulogizing Custer. People like Whitaker is the famous one, but also to a large extent Godfrey as well. So their aim wasn't really to look at the battle in sort of in a forensic way. It was to really eulogize Custer. And that is really Graham's intention. It's to kind of deflate that kind of historical approach and to actually try and investigate it more forensically. And it's fantastic for that, because you really get the feeling that you are close to all these various characters, of which there are many photographs in the book. It's really kind of close up, almost like you're sitting in a courtroom listening to these people on a witness stand. Can really recommend this. And a lot of the documents, as you might have noticed earlier, things like Bentine's family gave him access to all of Bentine's correspondence with his wife while he was on campaign, and in particular with another character, another person who was actually at the battle, served under Reno, I believe. His name was Goldin, and Goldin wrote an account of the battle on which he relied heavily on Bentine's account. There's a picture of John Martin there. He was the trumpeter who delivered Custer's last message from, so he was the last person to see Custer alive, who survived. What was I saying? Oh yeah, with gold in. Yeah, here is there is a picture of Theodore Goldin. So as you can see, another serving army officer, and he wrote an account of the battle and had a long correspondence with Benteen. And in those letters, what really comes across, trying to find them again. This is a lot of them. What really comes across is the politics that was rife in the army, not only after 1876, but prior to it. You really get a sense of rivalry, of ambitious men all trying to kind of, and conflicts of personality, all taking shape in these outposts in the West. And Benteen's description of Custer to Goldin in this private correspondence. So there's no real, he hasn't really got an axe to grind when he's talking to Goldin. If he'd come out with this kind of thing in public or in the court, Reno's court of inquiry, it would be a different thing. But he talks of Custer as being a really despicable person. And this is before. This is from his experience of having served alongside Custer out in the Indian Wars in the 1860s, at the Battle of Washita, for instance, and in 1868, and then later on in the various. They shared stations together in various places. But his depiction of Custer is really derogatory. He paints Custer as being a very self-promoting person and very corrupt. So, for instance, Custer's known as being, as having been a strict disciplinarian, punishing soldiers for desertion and so on. But Benteen gives you a different spin on that aspect of Custer's personality, because he recounts times when Custer would station his command close to a sutler's, so close to a fort, for instance. So he'd be within a stone's throw of a fort, and he would ask the sutlers for a bung, basically for a bribe, in order for his troops to remain there and to be given permission to go into the fort or into town or whatever to buy commodities from that particular sutler. So he was really asking for a kind of backhand in order to supply the sutler with the custom of his command. And this is why he came down so hard on soldiers who deserted, because frequently the definition of desertion was simply going into a locality to spend your money, not necessarily on alcohol, but often on supplementing their rations with, tinned fruit or whatever it might be. So if the bribe wasn't forthcoming from the sutler, what Custer would do is either move his command on to somewhere else, camp somewhere else, or he would forbid the men from going into the settlement. And if they did, he would then charge them with desertion and punish them really severely. And it wasn't the desertion that galled him; it was the fact that the sutler was making money. And he wasn't getting a piece of the cake, as it were. And also Benteen talks about Custer's little sort of coterie of admirers and cronies, and how they would frequently invite new officers into a kind of card game, and then try and fleece them of their money. And Benteen was a good poker player, and also came from a very wealthy background, so he was able to call bluffs and so on, which these other junior officers who were surrounding Custer didn't like. And Benteen sort of fell out with them over card games and so on as well, and had a very low opinion of Custer's military record. Benteen himself was, had a very distinguished Civil War record. He didn't rate Custer very highly militarily. He certainly didn't like him personality-wise. And then there was the famous incident at the Battle of the Washita, where Benteen was present, where Custer allowed Elliot to be cut off and annihilated, and Benteen, was aggrieved at that as well as Custer's treatment of the prisoners that he took. It was Benteen who really took the women and children under his, hand, really, to protect them from Custer's, attitude towards just basically ransacking the village. So that is just one thing, one of the nuances that comes out in this book. There are hundreds of others. I mean, another is that during the Reno-Benteen fight, Benteen was the only person that Reno mentioned in dispatches, as it were. Benteen's basically saved the remaining part of Custer's command. But a lot of people like Godfrey, for instance, weren't mentioned and felt they deserved a mention for their role. The episode when Weir got impatient that Reno wasn't trying to determine what had happened to Custer's 5 troops, and set out without orders to try and get to where Custer was, and got pushed back by the weight of the Indians. And I forget the name of the guy who accompanied him. Might have been Edgerly. And Godfrey helped stem the repulse of Weir's little foray by the Indians, and hold them back while they all got back safely to the position where Reno and Benteen took their stand and entrenched. But yeah, there was a lot of resentment from the people who grouped themselves around Libby Custer, and there was a lot of resentment with them that none of them had been mentioned by Reno, which is one of the reasons why they took a sort of personal dislike to Reno, who wasn't a particularly admirable character, it has to be said. Was an alcoholic, and wasn't a particularly able officer, but the blame was really put, because they wanted to defend Custer, too much of the blame was really put on Reno's actions on the day, and Benteen came to Reno's defence, really, because he recognised this attack on Reno wasn't entirely fair. But yeah, lots you can get out of this book. Really, really worth looking at if you haven't read it. But most people who are into Custeriana would be familiar with this book. Right, one more thing to show you. So here it is. Arrived a couple of days ago. I haven't had much of a chance to look at it yet, though, I must admit. So this isn't by any means a review, but it's the republication after 40 years of Pony Wars by Ian Beck, who sadly died in the mid 1980s. Yeah, it's available through Bacchus. They did say that they were going to bring it out in the autumn, but we're still not in September yet, and here it is. Really delighted to have hold of this. It's what I expected, though. My first impressions definitely are that it's exactly what I expected, which is a set of rules which have aged. There's no getting around it, but I mean, what it is, it's a sort of loving, nostalgic reproduction of them, with, souped up, because the original books, the original rules were in these kind of very cheap looking covers, but now it's got all these beautiful pictures. And what I like as well is a lot of the pictures are from the time, they're old photographs out of miniature war games, for instance. There, I think this one is a more recent one, 28mm cavalry troopers from Galloping Major, but this one here is definitely from miniature war games from the archives. This is pictures of the original game of Pony Wars. Yeah, but very much rules of their time. Lots of tables. Lots of, well, they probably would say not lots, but it does feel like lots of bookkeeping to me nowadays. Keeping track of individual figures, ammunition expenditure, and that kind of thing, and very kind of straitjacketed in terms of the sort of game you can play with it. As I say, there are quite a lot of pictures from the game, and all these elements are kind of embedded in the game. So you have the wagon train that has to be protected, the mission stations, the settlers, the mining camp, all these kind of things that have to be there on the table and crop up as places that need to be dealt with. The game is a cooperative game, so it's perfect for solo wargaming. So I'm going to certainly enjoy that aspect of it. Look, here's a typical kind of table here of civilian reaction tests and so on. This is the kind of mechanism that it uses. More on the cards later, but very much kind of you need to have present on the table all these various little localities and so on. I mean, in particular, all the kind of US troops, the reinforcements that come on the table, enter from Fort Laramie. So I'm going to need to get a model of Fort Laramie. Luckily, I've got some files on that I purchased already that I can print up on my 3D printer, so I'll be able to do that. But it's kind of a 2021 presentation of this old set of rules, so it's been made to look absolutely fantastic. The quick it does say at the beginning of the book that quick reference sheets and all those kind of things are available from the Pony Wars website, but as of my last time of looking, they still aren't there. So hopefully they'll get those up and available to download, because there are an awful lot of them. This is a kind of percentile chart of some kind. I haven't quite fathomed how you do it, but it saves you rolling 40 dice at a time and so on. But it's beautiful, and it does involve cards. I haven't got to that part of the rules yet to understand how the cards work, but I would imagine back in the day these were things that you photocopied and printed out and would have looked pretty crude. but now they're very professionally reproduced with these sort of backs on them. Or maybe you used ordinary playing cards, I don't know. As I say, I've hardly looked at these rules yet, other than a quick skim through. But it's going to take me, I've got a feeling that I'm going to need a lot more figures to play it. You can see from some of these pictures, I mean, I've certainly got enough, I could reproduce that with the figures I've got, but some of the pictures that show all the massed bodies of Indians attacking, it took me a little while to get those. There, that kind of thing. But yeah, really pleased to have this. I still think probably black powder is going to be my go-to set of rules. You know, as I say, black powder is a lot more reflective of the way rules have developed, especially, you know, through Games Workshop. I mean, Rick Priestley's background was at Games Workshop anyway, and rule mechanisms and so on owe a lot to GW. But yeah, I am gonna have fun with this set of rules. I can feel it anyway. Trying to zoom in on. That's a picture from the old game and their table that they took round shows. There were 4 of them. One of them must be the guy who runs Bacchus. I'm pretty sure. I don't know which one of those he is. It's either John Spencer, Mike Bussey, or Peter Berry. One of those is going to be the Bacchus guy, and that's a picture of Ian Beck, who is no longer with us. Yeah, that's it. That's my update. Bit of a long one as usual. I let my tongue wag for quite a long time. But hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.